I think I didn't do anything wrong, just said what everyone was already thinking, that his best friend outshined him in every way. I laughed, the table laughed, and he just stared at me like a stranger. The next morning, a process server handed me divorce papers before I'd even finished my coffee. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I didn't think I did anything wrong. I only said what was true, that I was tired of carrying the spark alone while he drifted through life like a cloud. Evan called it cruelty. I called it honesty. He was too soft to handle honesty. That's how it started, really. Me trying to wake him up, and him mistaking my voice for attack. Our home looked perfect from the outside. 2 stories, trimmed hedges, white curtains that always looked pressed. Inside, it felt more like an office than a house. Everything had its place. Evan liked quiet, order, and schedules. He woke at 6, ran, packed our daughter's lunch, and left for the engineering firm by 7:30. I followed my own pattern, get Ivy ready, drop her at school, then head to the insurance office where I worked. I liked the chatter there, the tiny dramas, the way people noticed when I walked in. At home, I could vanish in a room and he wouldn't even look up from his laptop. At first, I told myself we were just different types. He found peace in silence. I found it in reaction. He didn't understand that a marriage needs energy, tension, something to keep it alive. So I made my own. I'd tease him in front of friends, call him my steady accountant, even though he was an engineer. He'd smile tightly and move on. It bothered me how hard it was to get a rise out of him. I thought maybe he'd forgotten how to care. Then there was Liam. He was Evan's best friend since college. Same age, same sense of humor, but louder, funnier, stronger. He owned a gym across town and always had this relaxed confidence about him. We'd all meet for dinner sometimes, and I could feel the difference immediately. Evan would sit politely, ask about work, nod through stories. Liam would make jokes, talk with his hands, make everyone laugh. I liked how alive I felt near him. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was contrast. I started to think maybe I could use that contrast to shake Evan out of his shell. At work, my manager Jody always said I was too much woman for a quiet man. She loved gossip, loved when I told her about our bland dinners, or how Evan never complimented me anymore. She said men like that need pressure, something to remind them they can lose you. I told her I wasn't going anywhere, but I didn't like the idea of being taken for granted either. So, when Liam offered me a free month at his gym, I said yes. I told Evan it was part of a wellness challenge through work. He nodded, said he was proud of me. I wanted him to ask more questions, maybe get a little jealous. He didn't. The first night I came home sweaty and glowing, he only asked how it went. I said it was amazing. He said he was glad. I wanted to scream. At the gym, Liam was funny and friendly. He said I had good form, better than most beginners. He'd wink, not seriously, just enough to make me laugh. The first time he complimented me, I felt guilty, then powerful. I told Jody and she said, "See? Someone appreciates you." I started wearing nicer clothes to work, new perfume, subtle changes that made me feel visible again. At home, I kept pushing small buttons. I'd come in late from workouts, leave my phone face down. When Evan asked if I wanted to have dinner together, I'd say I'd already eaten. He'd nod, go back to his spreadsheet. Once, I said he was married to Excel, and he said, "At least it talks less." That was the first time I saw a flash of irritation. I laughed and told him not to take everything so seriously. On weekends, we used to take Ivy to the park. That stopped too. He said I was busy. I said he could go without me. Ivy didn't complain, but she watched us carefully, like she was trying to measure how far apart we'd drifted. Monica, his mother, called one night and asked if we were okay. I said yes, of course. She said Evan had sounded tired lately. I told her men always sound tired when they're bored. She didn't laugh. The truth was, I liked the attention I got at work and at the gym more than the safety of home. It made me feel alive, seen. I told myself there was nothing wrong with that. I wasn't cheating, I was just reclaiming my confidence. Evan should have been proud of me for improving myself. But instead of noticing, he became even quieter. One night, he asked why I'd stopped wearing my wedding ring to work. I said I was getting it resized, which was a lie. He didn't push it, but he looked at me differently, like he finally saw me as someone unpredictable. I liked that too. Tessa, my younger sister, came over for coffee the next weekend. She said she saw my photos at the gym and that I looked great. She joked that maybe I'd find a fitness upgrade. I laughed and said Evan would never even notice if I did. She said, "Then make him notice." It sounded like a dare. That evening, I mentioned to Evan that people at the office thought I looked younger lately. He said, "That's nice." Just that. I told him he could at least act like he cared. He said, "Do you want me to lie?" I said I wanted him to feel. He said, "Feel what?" I said, "Anything." Later that night, I heard him in his home office again, typing, clicking. I peeked in and saw him scanning something. Old bank statements, tax forms, our mortgage contract. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was getting organized. I joked that he was planning an escape. He didn't smile. Before bed, I checked his phone. His call log was clean. No texts, no photos, no hidden folders. That made me feel oddly angry. I thought, if he's so perfect, why does he make me feel like the villain? The next day, he suggested we have dinner with Liam and some friends soon. I agreed too quickly. Maybe, I thought, if he saw the difference between them, he'd finally realize how far behind he'd fallen. I wanted him jealous, desperate even. I told myself it would help us, that a little sting would wake him up. When I looked at him across the table that night, calm and unbothered as always, I decided I'd go further next time. If words were what it took to shake him, then I'd use them. I didn't know then that one joke, one line, would burn everything down. The night of the dinner, I told myself I was just going to have fun. I even said it out loud while putting on mascara, like I needed to hear it from someone. Evan waited by the door, keys in hand, wearing the same navy shirt he always wore when he wanted to look nice. I told him he looked serious. He said it was a dinner, not a concert. I rolled my eyes and said, "That's the problem." He didn't answer, just locked the door behind us. We met the group at Ridgepoint Grill, our usual spot for birthdays and Friday nights. The place had warm lights and that fake rustic smell of wood polish. Liam was already there, sitting at the bar, laughing with two of our co-workers. When he saw us, he waved big, called me Jim Royalty. I laughed too loudly and touched his arm when we walked in. Evan gave a polite nod. At the table, things started normal. The talk was about work, movies, gym routines. Liam told a story about a client fainting during a workout, and everyone laughed. I noticed the way he leaned back, comfortable in his skin. Evan sat straight, quiet, drinking water. I tried to draw him in, asked what he'd do if someone fainted in his office. He said it didn't happen there. People chuckled lightly. I felt annoyed that he couldn't just play along. Drinks came. I ordered wine, then another. Liam teased that I was braver than he remembered. I said maybe I needed courage to handle engineers. People laughed. Evan smiled, that tight, controlled smile he used when he didn't want to make a scene. It only made me want to go further. I started talking about how men lose their edge after marriage, how they stop trying. Cora, one of the girls from my office, nodded, feeding me. Liam said marriage wasn't for everyone. I said, maybe you're right. Some men shouldn't even try unless they can keep up. Evan looked at me then, not angry, just still. That calm expression again. Someone asked about our gym sessions. Liam said I was a fast learner, stronger than she looked. I smiled and said, Well, I need someone who can keep up with me. Clearly not everyone can. People laughed awkwardly. Evan put down his fork. He said softly, "Corinne." I said, "What? I'm complimenting your friend." Then I said it. I don't even know why it came out the way it did. Maybe because I wanted to break that calm mask once and for all. I said, "Your bestie clearly has bigger everything. Muscles, confidence, even energy. You could learn a thing or two." The words dropped, like a glass shattering. Forks paused mid-air. Cara made a choking sound. Liam went pale, muttered something like, "All right, wow." Evan just stared at me. No anger, no shout, nothing. That silence burned worse than if he'd yelled. I tried to laugh, said it was just a joke. No one joined me. Evan folded his napkin, set it beside his plate, and told the waiter he'd cover the bill. He didn't even look at me. I said he was overreacting. Liam tried to deflect, said everyone was too tense. I said, "See? He gets it." Evan said, "No, he doesn't." On the drive home, I talked too much. I said he needed to lighten up, that people tease their partners all the time. He said quietly, "Not like that." I said he was too sensitive, that maybe if he showed confidence, I wouldn't have to joke about it. He asked if I meant it, what I said. I told him not to twist words. He said, "You said them clearly enough." When we got home, I expected him to slam a door or shout. He didn't. He just took off his shoes, walked to his office, and closed the door. I poured myself another drink, pacing the kitchen, waiting for him to come out and argue. He didn't. The house stayed painfully calm. Around midnight, I knocked on his door. I said we should talk. He said he'd rather not say things we'd regret. I said I already regretted marrying a man who couldn't take a joke. He didn't answer. I waited another minute, then said, "Maybe your best friend can coach you on how to have a backbone." Still nothing. I went to bed angry, sure he'd come in later and apologize like always. He didn't. I woke up to the sound of a printer humming. When I got up, he was scanning papers, our marriage certificate, bank statements, insurance files. I asked what he was doing. He said he was sorting essentials. I laughed and said, "You're seriously making an inventory because of one joke?" He said, "No, because of years of them." At work the next morning, I told Jody everything. She gasped and said he sounded insecure. She said most men hate seeing their wives outshine them. I agreed easily. It felt good to have someone on my side again. Later, Cara sent me a text saying I'd gone too far, but that Evan's friend didn't seem offended. That made me feel better. I even texted Liam, half joking, saying he'd survived my sense of humor. He replied, "Maybe keep me out of it next time." That afternoon, Evan texted that Ivy would stay with his mother overnight. I said fine, that I needed a break anyway. He didn't reply. When I got home, his office door was open. The papers were neatly stacked in folders, labeled house, finances, custody. That last word made me stop. I picked up the folder and flipped through it, blank forms printed from some legal site. I told myself he was bluffing, trying to scare me. When he came in, I said, "So you're planning your escape now?" He said, "Planning peace." I laughed, called him dramatic. He said, "You should sleep in the guest room tonight." I said, "You can sleep there if you want space." He said, "No, I'll take our daughter's room." He gathered his pillow and left. The door closed softly, and I lay there in the big bed, wide awake, telling myself he was bluffing. He always cooled off, always forgave. But this silence felt different, not hurt, not angry, just final. In the morning, the coffee pot was empty, the kitchen spotless. On the counter was a sticky note in his neat handwriting. "Please keep your gym nights consistent for Ivy's schedule." That was it. No signature, no heart. Just logistics. I crumpled it up and threw it away. Then I opened my phone and posted a gym selfie with the caption, "Some men can't handle strong women." It got likes instantly. For a moment, I felt powerful again. But later that night, when I saw the glow of the printer through his office door again, I felt that same cold twist in my stomach, like something irreversible had already started, and I was the only one pretending it hadn't. After that night, the house changed in ways that were hard to name. Nothing looked different. The walls, the photos, the furniture all stayed the same, but the air felt thinner. Evan stopped talking to fill the silence. I told myself I didn't care. I'd tried to make him feel, to get any reaction at all. If he wanted to play the martyr, that was on him. At work, I turned the story into entertainment. I told Jody and Kara that Evan was acting like a wounded saint, punishing me with silence. Jody laughed, said men like that always come crawling back once they realize they overplayed the drama. Kara said he must be embarrassed because I'd spoken truth out loud. I nodded, pretending I believed that. Liam didn't text for a week. When I finally messaged him about a gym session, he said he was busy. I joked that he was avoiding me. He said things had gotten weird. I said Evan didn't own the word weird. He didn't respond. I started going to the gym alone, but it didn't feel the same. The staff were polite, but I caught 2 trainers whispering once. It hit me that Liam might have told them something, maybe that I was causing trouble. That night, I deleted a few photos of us together from my phone. It wasn't guilt, it was strategy. At home, I tried to reclaim my ground. I wore perfume again, cooked dinner for the first time in weeks, set the table neatly. When Evan came in, he said it smelled nice. I said, "Maybe you should appreciate it while you can." He said, "I do." He ate quietly, thanked me afterward, and went back to his office. I wanted him to argue, to say something sharp. Instead, he just left the room. The next morning, Ivy spilled juice on the counter. Evan cleaned it before I even noticed. When I said she should learn to clean her own mess, he said, "Children learn by watching." It sounded like something he meant for me too. Later, I caught him on the phone, his voice low and calm. I only heard parts. "Yes, next Thursday. Yes, I'll bring documentation." When I asked who it was, he said, "Sandra." His sister, the lawyer. My stomach dropped. I said, "You're really involving family now?" He said, "Just getting advice." I called Tessa that night and told her everything. She said he was being manipulative, that no man files for divorce after one argument. I said exactly. She told me to show confidence, post photos, remind everyone who I was. So I did. I shared pictures from the gym again, captions about healing energy and taking back control. It got attention. But 2 days later, one of Evan's colleagues liked the post. I imagined him showing it around the office, making me the villain in his quiet little story. When I got home that evening, there was a new file box near his desk, labeled folders inside. Bills, joint account, mortgage, Ivy. I flipped through one marked House. There were copies of every repair receipt for the last 3 years, each signed by him. Another folder had bank printouts with my recent gym payments highlighted. I felt heat rise in my face. I said, "You're collecting evidence like I'm some criminal." He said, "No, just keeping things clear." I said, "You really think anyone would believe you over me?" He said, "Truth doesn't need sides." That phrase bothered me. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd already decided what the ending would be. The next day at the office, Kara said she'd seen Evan at the grocery store and that he looked peaceful. The word stung. Peaceful was supposed to describe me, not him. I started talking louder in meetings, making jokes at my own expense so people would see me as the funny one again, not the cruel wife. But gossip has its own shape. I overheard 2 co-workers whispering about the dinner story. Apparently, someone had recorded part of it on their phone. My voice, my laugh, the words, "Your bestie clearly has bigger." I felt the blood drain from my face. That night, I accused Evan of spreading it. He said he hadn't told anyone. I said, "Then how do people know?" He said, Because you said it in public. I shouted that he was loving this, playing victim. He didn't even flinch. He said, "I'm not playing." Then he picked up his car keys and said he had errands. When he came back later, he told me Ivy would stay with his mother for a few days. I said he was poisoning her against me. He said, "She just needs quiet." I said, "You mean you do?" He didn't answer. The following weekend, we had a small family cookout at his parents' house. I went because I wanted to show strength. Monica hugged me politely but didn't make eye contact. Gerald offered me lemonade without a smile. Sandra, his sister, was there too, with her calm lawyer face. I tried to start conversations, made jokes, laughed too loudly. No one joined in. At one point, I went inside for more napkins and found Sandra at the kitchen counter, sorting papers into her briefcase. I asked if she worked on weekends. She said sometimes family needs come first. She didn't look at me when she said it. I said, "You think I don't see what you're doing?" She said, "Then stop giving us so much to see." When I came back outside, Evan was helping Ivy with her shoes. She asked if I was coming home with them later. He said, "Not tonight." I tried to act unfazed, but even Monica's eyes softened with pity. On the drive home, I called Tessa again. She said to let him cool off. I said I didn't want to wait. I wanted to end the suspense. I told her maybe I'd file first, beat him to it. She said, "You should. Show him who's in control." That sounded good for a minute, but when I looked around the empty passenger seat, the house lights glowing faintly in the distance, I realized I didn't even know what control meant anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence felt heavy, full of invisible movement. Around midnight, I got up to drink water. His office light was on again. I peeked in. He wasn't there, but his computer screen glowed with an email draft titled "Custody Preparation." My first instinct was to delete it, erase the threat. Instead, I closed the door, went back to bed, and told myself he wouldn't go through with it. He loved peace too much. He hated conflict. He wasn't like me. I repeated that until morning, like a charm to keep the world still, even as I knew it was already tilting away from me. By the time August came, everyone seemed to know something was wrong, though no one said it directly. The house was tidy, too tidy. Evan cooked, cleaned, handled Ivy's school forms, and spoke to me only about logistics. He treated me like a coworker, polite and distant. I told myself he was playing a game, trying to guilt me into submission. But when people look at you with calm instead of anger, it starts to feel like you don't exist at all. It was his mother, Monica, who invited me to the family barbecue. She said it would be good for Ivy. I almost refused, but Tessa said going would make me look stable, so I agreed. I spent an hour choosing an outfit, something effortless, like I was doing fine. When we arrived, Evan was already there, flipping burgers, laughing softly with his father. Seeing him relaxed like that irritated me more than if he'd ignored me. I tried to act unbothered. I smiled at everyone, complimented Monica's garden, handed Ivy her lemonade. Liam was there too, invited by Gerald. Of course, he greeted me awkwardly, eyes darting toward Evan. I said lightly, "Don't worry, I'm not telling any more jokes." He didn't laugh. During lunch, the small talk circled around Ivy's school, new neighbors, weather, the safest topics possible. I tried to steer it towards something playful. I said, Evan's always been the quiet one. I used to joke that if he stood next to Liam, people would think I married the wrong guy. No one laughed. Monica put down her fork. Evan didn't even look up. I felt heat rise in my face. "It's a joke," I said too loudly. Gerald said, "Some jokes don't sound like jokes." I forced a smile, saying people were too serious. Ivy tugged at my sleeve and whispered that she wanted to go home. That stung worse than Monica's silence. Later, I overheard Sandra talking with Monica near the porch. Sandra said something about protecting assets before filing. My chest went tight. I stepped closer, pretending to look for napkins. and caught Sandra's eye. She didn't look guilty, just tired. I asked, "Talking about work?" She said, "Always." Then she added, "Sometimes clients don't realize how public their actions have become." I didn't answer. When the barbecue ended, Evan offered to drive Ivy back to his parents' place for the night. I said I'd come too. He said, "She's fine with me." I said, "You don't get to decide that." He said, "Actually, I do tonight." Monica touched my arm gently and said it might be better if Ivy stayed with them for a few days. I nodded stiffly, pretending it was my idea. The next few days, I tried to fill the silence. I went shopping, met Tessa for lunch, told her I was handling everything gracefully. She said she'd seen people commenting on that dinner story again, the bigger line, floating around social media. I told her not to believe rumors. She said, "But you did say it, right?" I changed the subject. At work, people were suddenly polite in a way that felt fake. Jody said HR might want to chat about professionalism online. I said it was ridiculous. She shrugged, said, "Gossip spreads fast when someone leaves a digital trail." That word, trail, stayed with me all day. When I got home, the front door was unlocked. Evan was in the living room, folding laundry. I asked why he was there early. He said, "Just finishing things before Friday." I said, "What happens Friday?" He said, "You'll see." That night I couldn't rest. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Liam or Tessa to message something comforting. Nothing came. I scrolled through old posts, rereading my own captions, all the self-love quotes that now look desperate. On Thursday, my mother called. She said Monica had phoned her out of concern. I asked what that meant. She said Monica was worried about Ivy's stability, that Evan had mentioned upcoming legal mediation. I felt my stomach twist. I said, "He wouldn't dare file." My mother said, "Maybe he already did." The next day proved her right. It happened during dinner at my parents' house. Tessa was there, my father too, pretending everything was normal. The doorbell rang. I assumed it was food delivery, but when I opened it, a man in a black jacket stood there holding a thick envelope. He asked if I was Corinne Vale. I said yes. He handed it over and said, "You've been served." For a second, I didn't move. My mother called from the table asking who it was. I shut the door, ripped the seal, and saw the heading, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." Temporary orders requested. My breath caught. I skimmed the pages, lists of accounts, assets, custody notes, evidence logs, my own social media screenshots. Liam's written statement confirming no romantic involvement. HR's letter about my online conduct. He had built an entire case while pretending to be silent. Tessa read over my shoulder and whispered, "He planned this." My father said nothing, just looked at the wall. My mother said, "You pushed him too far." I said, "He's punishing me for a joke." She said, "He's protecting himself." I threw the papers on the table and said, "He'll regret this." My father sighed, said, "I doubt it." That night, I drove to the house. Evan's car was in the driveway, lights off. I stormed in, holding the papers. He was in his office again, calm as always. I said, "You're really doing this? Over one mistake?" He said, "It wasn't one." I said, "You think this makes you noble?" He said, "No, it makes me free." I told him he was humiliating me, that everyone would think he was perfect and I was the monster. He said, "They already decided that when you laughed." I called him heartless. He said, "No, just tired." I left before I cried. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. When I got home to my parents' house, Tessa was waiting. She said, "He's serious, isn't he?" I said yes. She asked, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Fight." But even as I said it, my hands shook holding those papers. He'd written every date, every line, like a history of everything I'd pretended wasn't real. And the more I stared, the more I realized how quiet revenge can sound when it's made of facts instead of shouting. The mediation was held in a small windowless room at Sandra's law office. The air smelled of coffee and paper. I'd barely slept the night before, rehearsing speeches about love, loyalty, and forgiveness, all things I hadn't practiced in months. When I arrived, Evan was already seated with Sandra beside him. He looked calm, rested, infuriatingly at peace. I told myself to look just as composed. The mediator, a man in his 50s with a kind but blank expression, began by explaining the process. "We're here to discuss custody, finances, and property," he said. My stomach tightened at the word custody. Evan nodded like he'd been waiting for it. I smiled sweetly and said I wanted this to be amicable. He didn't look at me. Sandra handed the mediator a folder, thick, neatly labeled, full of copies. She said it contained supporting documentation. The mediator skimmed it and nodded approvingly. When it was passed to me, my pulse jumped. Inside were screenshots, receipts, photos from social media, and notes written in Evan's clear handwriting. Dates, times, witnesses. One page was a printed transcript from that dinner, recorded by someone at the table. My voice laughing. "Your bestie clearly has bigger everything." I felt the air go out of me. I said, "You had someone record me?" Sandra said calmly, "Multiple people came forward voluntarily." Evan didn't speak. He just kept his hands folded, his expression soft but unreadable. The mediator asked me to explain my side. I said I'd made mistakes, but I hadn't cheated, that it was all taken out of context. I said Evan was emotionally unavailable, that I'd been lonely and needed connection. Sandra asked, "Did he ever forbid you from socializing, restrict money, or show aggression?" I said no. She asked, "Then what did you need connection from?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just surgical. I glanced at Evan, hoping for a flicker of sympathy. He looked back, eyes steady. I said, "You're trying to destroy my image." He said, "No, I'm restoring mine." The mediator interrupted, suggesting we focus on Ivy's needs. Evan slid forward a typed proposal. Joint legal custody, alternating weekends, school exchanges, no unrelated overnight guests during Ivy's time. I said, "So you're banning me from having a life?" He said, "I'm asking for stability." He also asked for separate finances and to freeze the joint credit card. I called it petty. The mediator said it was standard. Evan said, "I've already covered the mortgage for 2 months. She can keep her paycheck." His voice didn't rise once. Mine did. I tried to paint him as controlling. I said he tracked expenses, kept records like a detective, and acted cold. Sandra said, "Documenting bills isn't control, it's preparation." The mediator nodded. I felt my throat tighten. When the session broke for lunch, I called Tessa in the hallway. She said I had to spin it, tell people he was weaponizing paperwork. I wanted to believe that, but even she sounded hesitant. "Corinne," she said softly, "maybe you should just let him do this quietly." I hung up before she finished. Back inside, the mediator reviewed the HR letter from my office. The part about unprofessional conduct on social media was highlighted. I said it was irrelevant. Sandra said it spoke to judgment, which affected custody decisions. My hands shook. Evan kept calm through every word, every accusation I threw. I said he was using his sister to manipulate the system. He said, "She offered help. I accepted." I said he was turning Ivy against me. He said, "She just wants calm." The mediator asked if we could both agree to keep personal comments away from the child. Evan nodded. I hesitated but eventually mumbled yes. Then Sandra produced another page, a short letter from Liam. It said there had been no affair, no inappropriate conduct, but that he regretted the public comments and hoped for healing on both sides. His words felt like a betrayal anyway. He hadn't protected me, he'd cleared himself. I said, "He's lying." Sandra said, "He's under oath." Evan didn't even glance at the letter. He'd already won that part. By the end of the session, the mediator had drafted a temporary order. Everything was printed precise: joint custody, separate accounts, household item division, and the rule about neutral communication through the parenting app. He asked if I had any objections. I said, "This is ridiculous." Evan said, "This is peace." The mediator slid the pen toward me. My hand hovered over the paper. I said, "You won't even fight for me?" Evan looked at me for the first time in hours and said, "You fought enough for both of us." I signed. He signed. Sandra thanked the mediator. It was all so polite, like closing a business deal instead of a marriage. When I stepped outside, Monica was sitting in the lobby with Ivy. She'd brought crayons and juice boxes, acting like this was just another errand. Ivy smiled when she saw me but didn't run into my arms. She said softly, "Dad says we're taking turns now." My throat went dry. I said, "That's right, sweetheart. Turns." Evan came out a moment later, crouched down, and tied her shoe while she talked about her drawing. Watching him be gentle made me furious, not because he was kind, but because I realized I couldn't undo that version of him anymore. Monica stood and thanked me for showing up calmly. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. Ivy held her father's hand, and they walked toward the elevator. I followed behind, waiting for him to look back. He didn't. At home that night, I poured wine and read the paperwork again. Every section felt like a verdict written in legal language. My name appeared next to phrases like social misconduct, instability, and voluntary acknowledgement. I'd signed all of it. I called Jody, hoping for outrage, but she just said, "Well, you knew he was the organized type." Then she told me HR was finalizing my warning letter. Even my job had turned grey and cold. Before bed, I checked the parenting app he'd set up. The first message was from him. "Pick up at 3's house. Please confirm. No greeting, no closing, no warmth. Just function." I typed confirmed and stared at the screen, wishing I could erase every word I'd said at that dinner, every laugh that felt like power, but turned into proof. The next morning, I woke up late, the house too quiet again. On the kitchen counter sat a single envelope. Evan must have dropped it off after I fell asleep. Inside was a receipt for Ivy's school tuition and a short note in his neat handwriting. "Everything is covered through the end of term. Take care." I stood there, holding the paper like it was the final piece of something breaking, and for the first time, I understood what silence can build, and how easily it can erase you. The court date felt like walking into a play I hadn't rehearsed for. Everyone else seemed to know their lines. The hall was cold and echoing, full of people whispering in low tones. Evan sat near the front, calm as ever, next to Sandra. I sat behind my lawyer, who'd been hired 2 days earlier and kept telling me to stay measured. I said I wasn't emotional, just misunderstood. She gave a small nod that said she didn't believe me. The judge was a woman in her 60s, eyes sharp behind glasses. She opened the file, a thick binder that looked heavier than it should have. My lawyer began by saying there was no infidelity, no violence, and that the marriage had simply suffered from communication strain. The judge asked if we disputed the evidence presented in the temporary orders. My lawyer said no, only the tone of interpretation. The judge smiled politely and said, "Tone didn't change facts." Sandra stood, calm and factual. She spoke about the dinner incident, the recorded remarks, the social posts, the HR report, and the financial movements afterward. Each point landed like a small hammer. I tried not to flinch. She said Evan sought nothing beyond fairness, joint custody, equal responsibility, clean division. "My client isn't interested in punishment," she said. "He's interested in peace." The judge turned to me. She asked if I wished to speak. I said yes. I wanted it on record that Evan had humiliated me with silence. that he'd turned everyone against me. She asked if I meant through conversation or through action. I said through absence. The room stayed quiet long enough for the word to sound ridiculous. She said, "So, you're upset he didn't argue?" I said, "He made me the villain." She said, "You gave him the script." Evan never looked at me during any of it. When he spoke, it was only to confirm details, dates, accounts, Ivy's schooling schedule. His voice was steady, his hand still. I kept expecting anger, something human, but all I got was calm precision. When the judge read the final orders, her tone didn't waver. Joint legal custody, no spousal support, division of assets as documented, co-parenting communication through the approved app, and the immediate sale of the house with proceeds split evenly. I barely heard the rest. My lawyer whispered that it was fair. Merciful, actually. The judge ended with one line that stayed with me. Sometimes dignity requires documentation. Then she closed the folder. Evan thanked her. I didn't. Outside the courtroom, Monica waited with Ivy. She gave me a polite smile but said nothing. Ivy held her father's hand, swinging it gently, carefree. When she saw me, she ran over and said, "We're going to the park now." I knelt down and said I'd see her later. She nodded, distracted by the little stuffed animal in her backpack. Evan crouched to zip her coat and said to me, "The schedule's in the app." I said, "That's it? After everything?" He said, "That's enough." Then he took Ivy's hand and walked away. Sandra followed, carrying her folders, saying nothing. I stood there in the corridor until everyone else left. The floor tiles looked too clean, too bright. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was breathe quietly, the same way he had for months. Later that afternoon, I went back to the house, now half empty. Boxes lined the hallway. His guitar was gone, the framed wedding photo too. The kitchen echoed. On the counter sat a plain white envelope with my name written neatly. I opened it. Inside was a single page, folded once. It said, "For what it's worth, I did love you. I just stopped needing to prove it." I sank into a chair and stared at the sentence until the words blurred. The printer in his office was unplugged, the shelves bare. The silence felt so complete it almost had weight. By evening, I packed a small bag for Ivy's next visit, labeling it carefully. I wrote notes on what snacks she liked, which pajamas were softest, trying to sound organized, dependable, sane. I told myself I could rebuild, that people would forget the story eventually. But the truth lingered under every word. He hadn't destroyed me in anger. He'd dismantled me with proof. When I locked the door behind me, the echo bounced back, sharp and final. For the first time, I realized he hadn't won by leaving. He'd won by making silence the last word, and by teaching me that I'd never get another. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.